Hello, and welcome back to the Futurism at J2 podcast. Today I'm joined by Max and Ricardo.
Hello.
So,
And today's topic is the future of transportation, which is a really cool topic, and I'm very excited for today's conversation. So, to kind of get the conversation started, one idea I had for what transportation could look like in maybe a few years or a decade or a couple decades is rocket transportation. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with like SpaceX and like the Falcon Heavy, but the idea is you could launch passengers in rockets and basically have them go to space, orbit Earth, and then land in a different location like across the world. So like you could go like New York to Shanghai. And the beauty of rocket transportation is you're going so quickly that you can literally get somewhere that would normally take, on a plane ride, like 18 hours. You can get there in like half an hour or like under an hour, which is insane. Like that just cuts the travel time to insanely low amounts. So that is one thing that really excites me because that's not really a technology that um, has been implemented yet. So I'm really excited to see if that happens in the next few years. So what do you guys think about
I think
rocket transportation?
I think it'll happen, especially seeing the rise in celebrities going to space, and like for example, Jeff Bezos going to space, which I will admit is sort of an ostentatious flex of wealth, but I still think that does show that we are moving in the right direction as far as rocket transportation and things like that. And space travel I think is another thing that we haven't really considered either as far as what travel will look like for people, right? So like you have the rocket transportation where you can go from country to country very quickly, but one thing that I think we forgot to even like talk about was the fact that people are looking to colonize Mars, the moon, things like that. We're going to have space travel eventually for the masses, right? And that's going to be nuts. That's a whole different conversation as colonization of other planets, but that's something I think that we will see in our lifetime is people regularly traveling to specifically the moon, I think, at the very least.
yeah, one of the things that actually just reminded me of is there's this anime called wait, I don't exactly remember what it's called. But it essentially has to do with this AI robot from the future who her whole job is in a theme park essentially to be an idol, right? To sing, to be able to bring happiness to a lot of people. Well, it turns out she's one of the few robots that is still available and able to work like centuries into the future. And what happens is a war breaks out between machines and the people. So machines start going ham, people start going at it, and she's the only one that can stop it by transporting her consciousness back into the past. And one of the specific events that helps her to like stop that from happening is there's this like big incident that happens on a spaceship. But the cool part about this is that the spaceship acts like a cruise.
Oh,
So instead
gotcha.
of cruising around in like the ocean, people get on this massive airship that accommodates all their needs to essentially cruise around space for a little bit, right? Up top of the earth. And I feel like that's also one of the things we're going to see, not just, for the sake of public transport, but also maybe as a way of entertainment
Right,
and
like
get
Joyride in
to,
space.
right, and get to places. Like imagine being on a cruise ship
Oh my gosh.
from Earth to like Mars.
Right? Or like just a cruise ship around the world, right? Like in space, floating, right? Like that's a novelty in itself, right? Like a lot of times cruises go in a circle, and they'll end up at the same port where they started, right?
Right.
Like that's totally possible too, to just have a spaceship that's a cruise that orbits the Earth. Then we're one step closer to Wall-E.
Oh my god.
Actually, yeah.
Oh no.
Hopefully we won't end like
Yeah, hopefully not.
Yeah.
Hopefully the good aspects of
Right.
Wall-E.
Yeah.
Another really cool idea, which I'm sure you have all heard of, is the Virgin Hyperloop, which is basically the idea of having extremely quick train rides. So trains that can travel the speed of like airplanes. So this is also getting into the ultra fast travel, like with the rocket transportation. This is kind of the same category where you're getting to places that would normally take like hours in like, a couple dozen minutes. So that's another thing that I think is really promising, and that's something that's being implemented as we speak. So I'm really excited to see what happens with that. I know like Japan, right? Obviously they have a very robust transportation system, and what are their trains called?
Like the bullet trains.
Yeah, the bullet trains.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is really
Going like what, like close to like 200 miles per hour sometimes.
that's
crazy
so
like
cool. So cool to me. Actually, I had a question for you guys. Like,
Yeah.
what does it do to society when our travel times are cut down like 1,000%? Like, does that allow us to have more free time, or have more time at work? You know what I mean? Like, because right now there's so many people just stuck in buses, stuck in trains, and it's like part of their day to day. But maybe we don't have to do that. And like, what does that do to just society and like people at work and free time?
So I think that the biggest change that we'll see is the fact that people will now more or less be expected to commute to work, right? No matter where they are, right? So right now we have so many people who work from home, not just simply because of the pandemic, but due to the fact that they're sort of stationed in one spot and it's a hassle to move, right? I think we'll see a lot of people start actually going into work again because it's much easier to work with somebody in person, I think, in most jobs than it is to have somebody working online, no matter who you are. So I think that with extremely fast transportation, once it gets to a point where it's, relatively affordable for people, I think that they will be expected to show up to work again, right? Even jobs like, like freelance programmers, right? Who might go work on a project for 6 months, and then once they finish that, they go work on another project. They might still be expected to show up at, an office, right? Because now transportation is so fast.
Interesting.
Yeah, I
That's a
actually
good point.
kind of think of the same way. And one of the things that like the fact that of just cutting down on time just means obviously increased productivity for a lot of these people. But like you were saying, a lot of increased like free time that you're able to use. One of the things that I really hated about going to like in high school was getting on the bus.
Oh my gosh.
Because sometimes if you were lucky you lived close enough to the school but
Right.
also to a bus stop where you were either like the last one to get picked up and then your next stop was the school. So it was like a 5-minute ride. It was fine. But if you were like me and had to not only wait for the bus to get there on time, which is
Gosh.
I hate that because they can be unreliable sometimes. Even here at Hopkins, the buses aren't necessarily great.
I could talk all about that.
Yeah. Plus the time it just takes to get places, right? Where maybe if you had that time, you could have used that time to play a video game, to read something, to work on a project or a homework that you couldn't necessarily do while on the bus. That's 30 minutes of your lifetime every day that you are restricted on being able to use it for so many other things. That are you now getting those back? Right? It's a freedom. It's a big freedom having the time that you would otherwise spend on traffic, on many other things, just having that time back. Just imagine how many hours of your life you spent on traffic, and imagine being able to get those back and being like, here, you can do whatever you want with that time. Use it for yourself. Wouldn't that be amazing?
That would, but what I think is sort of interesting is you kind of already see a lot of people doing this. So I take public transit, specifically the Jimmy, to get here every meet, and all the time I see people with laptops, with switches, with music, or they're listening to music or whatever, and they are kind of like spending their free time on the bus. And I think it's possible that it would actually cause people to have less free time, because with every technological innovation, there hasn't necessarily been a increase in free time, but rather an increase in productivity. So I think it is possible that it would go both ways.
Right.
One in the direction that you're talking, and then another where some people would then use that time that they were previously using sitting reading a book while waiting to get to work are now, you know, getting to work in a matter of, minutes or seconds, or however transit evolves. I think that it could potentially go both ways. Actually, suddenly people will have a lot more free time, and certain people will have a lot less.
You know what? That you're actually bringing up a great point. My dad actually like works in construction. And one of the things that he sometimes has to do, he has to move from workplace to workplace, still on company time. So even if he's sitting on like a car ride to get to the place, he's still getting technically paid for that time. So I totally see your point of if we now have these like super fast modes of transportation, that might spell more work for people that perform those types of jobs where they have to move from place to place, which for them isn't necessarily great if they're already being worked hard enough. So I totally see your point.
Yeah, but I definitely do think that it will open up more opportunity for people to have for people to have sort of have free time, and it'll also open up. It'll also make, I think, transit will be more dependable as well too, right? Which will ultimately lead to more free time because you won't have to wait for somebody who's late, right? Things like that.
Yeah, I was thinking about what you guys are saying, and I was thinking just about like the pandemic, and when we had Zoom University, right?
Yeah.
How much, like, those little minutes that you're like walking in between classes and like going places, it really adds up. And like I'm not able to do like homework in that time, and it's probably like, I don't know, 40 minutes of transportation that it's walking, it's not really public transportation.
Right.
Personally, but like 40 minutes at Hopkins is a lot. Like you can get a homework assignment done in 40 minutes. It's like it adds up. So to me, yeah, it's really, I think it's really a double-edged sword, right? Because like you mentioned, obviously it's going to get people places faster and there's going to be less transit time, but like, with your dad working in the company and like, having that time where he's not really working but still getting paid,
Right.
like it gets rid of those benefits. So yeah, it's a really good point. Another concept that I think, and this is something that's probably going to happen, actually it is already happening, is self-driving cars.
Yeah.
I think this is really probably the biggest, most practical thing that's going to happen. Well, not practical, but
I think it's the most revolutionary thing that's happening right now.
Exactly. Yes. That's exactly what I was what I was trying to say. So obviously we have like Teslas and stuff, right? I think that's probably the most robust system we have right now. Obviously it's not like fully, I would kind of define it as like guided self-driving, where you still have to like monitor it. There's still like a human driver, but it can still do a lot of like cruising and like monitoring the environment. So what do you guys think about self-driving cars? Like, do you think that they will remove the need for human drivers?
I think eventually, yes. I think that eventually what the future of self-driving is going to look like is you hop into your car, you plug in your destination, and your car takes you there, right? Through GPS, and you don't have to do anything really except sit there and wait. I think that what's sort of interesting too is self-driving cars will theoretically be much more efficient than a human driver, because a self-driving car doesn't necessarily have to abide by speed limits because they're not bound by human reaction time, right? Also, self-driving cars, you could theoretically map where every single car registered in like some sort of network is going. Like you could figure, like it would be able to calculate a route knowing where each car is at every single moment and where each car is going to be at every single moment. So it can calculate the fastest route and be extremely efficient as far as like wedging itself in to lots of traffic, and all of that traffic would then be moving at the same speed, right? So for example, if you have a crowded highway, right, of all cars going in the same direction at the same place, they would all be going lightning fast and they'd be very close to each other because they were based on some sort of computerized system that knew exactly where every car was. So they wouldn't necessarily crash together. and I think that that's ultimately how we would make it so that self-driving cars could be as efficient as they possibly can be. The one thing that this sort of that I think, if I don't know if it's going off in your mind, but a big red alert flag is going off about hacking.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So like theoretically, a terrorist could hack this system and it would cause complete chaos.
Yeah.
Right? Even hacking one individual self-driving car and like holding a
Yeah.
person hostage, right? Like that's totally possible.
My apologies. I couldn't hear.
Sorry.
I was gonna say though, I think that's a problem with every technology nowadays. Is everything is hackable, and
That's true.
everything is vulnerable to terrorist attacks and people who want to use the technology, even if it's designed for good, in evil ways.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think though that it poses a different threat because technology that's hackable today, isn't necessarily, in most cases, hacking a computer can't necessarily lead to immediate death in
True.
most cases
That is
for
true.
the average civilian, right? Whereas suddenly, if we have self-driving cars, every civilian is trusting their life with a computer. Whereas I've never placed my life in the hands of a computer, right? Whereas I would be doing it on a daily basis then. And I don't know about you, but like my programs that I write aren't necessarily flawless or anything.
Yeah, it's kind of scary. I guess that also reminds me of, I guess an analogy would be hacking into like a water supply or something like that, where the problem is when you have a network, right? That's the real problem, is when it's not like an isolated computer or something. It's one person can cause like a whole bunch of deaths and stuff, and that's
right.
like if you like poisoned a water supply, like I've heard, like hackers from other countries trying to like poison or like mess with like technology or not technology, but like hospital systems and stuff.
Yeah.
I know you have
so that's
experience with
something
this.
that happened sort of recently, within the past couple of years. My mother works at Franklin Square Hospital, which is part of MedStar, a network of different hospitals, and their entire network went down and was hacked and held for ransom. They couldn't access any of the patients' data, things like that. And it was kind of, it was a sort of a scary situation, right? So like, that's something that we have to be aware of. Like, it's kind of the same. We're kind of going down the same route, with being that vulnerable, and we have to ask ourselves, like, do we as a society feel comfortable investing in the future in that way?
True. Yeah, it's really, are the potential risks less than the potential benefits? That's really, I mean, that's every decision, like ever, and every technology ever. But I think the good thing about self-driving cars, like going past the, I guess, hacking and I guess trusting your life to a computer, is that theoretically, assuming they don't get hacked, they should be like, there should be a lot less accidents, right? And there should be a lot more efficiency and a lot less traffic. So I think that's kind of the positive side of it. But there's always that flip side that really has me worried. Like, I don't know. I know people like love their Teslas and stuff and like will allow it to drive, and I'm like, I don't know. Like, I feel like it'd be a cool experience because I've never been in a self-driving. I don't know. Have you?
No, me neither.
Have you been
I
in
have
one?
not. I'm not sure if I trust them yet. Right? Like, I really want to give it a decade.
We're really still in this testing phase. You're right, and like, yeah, it just, I think the technology just needs more time to develop, honestly, before I'm willing to trust it. I totally agree with that.
Honestly, I think it's kind of crazy how some people in this tech space, I personally follow a lot of like tech YouTubers and stuff, how much they're able to interact with this technology without that much worry. Like, of course they have like, their preconceptions of this technology, but I know a lot of like tech YouTubers that experience this technology like on an everyday basis, how much they trust it. One example is like MKBHD, right? Like the super famous YouTube channel that does tech. He gets different self-driving cars and different technologies and test drives them. And it's really crazy to see him like trust, obviously not fully, he's obviously always like attentive and of the car that he's essentially in and what it does. But the fact that he's able to trust it and even drives a Tesla like every day.
Yeah.
Usually with like the self-guided assistance on.
Yeah.
Like that in and of itself is pretty crazy and a little bit daring in my opinion. But it just kind of goes to show how some people like really have their trust in this technology, not only because of its potential right now, but because of what it can mean for the future. Right?
I mean, to be fair, we trust our technology every day.
Right.
Like if you think about, you get on an elevator, you're trusting that piece of tech to work.
That's
Uh,
true.
You use your computers and phones. Obviously, maybe it's not like a physical threat, but like you're trusting them to work and you're trusting them with your data.
Yeah.
And like buildings, right? You're trusting the buildings not to collapse. And
That is
I don't
a
know.
really good point.
A lot
is
of
that
other
we
examples.
constantly are trusting technology that we don't even think of. I think
Yeah.
buildings is one that I certainly have not thought of. You know, like we're constantly like we believe in that this building will work, right? I think the thing with computers is that it's sort of like walking into an old building or a building or like a brand new building that was built by a new architect, right? If
yeah,
you think about it that way, because if you think about it, computer science has really only blossomed within the past, not even century, right? We're just scratching the surface of what we'll be able to do with it, and we can't even conceive of what is eventually going to be computer science. But right now, it's sort of like we just have a bunch of people sort of playing with it, if that makes sense.
yeah,
So I think that trusting technology is different when something like architecture, which has been around for like thousands and thousands of years,
millennia.
compared to computers, right? On the other hand, I think that just because of like the knowledge curve, we're able to learn about computers a lot faster than
True.
you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think that there's definitely a balance of like trusting technology, but also being aware of it. And being wary, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, I think that eventually self-driving cars will be safe, and practical.
I think I'm thinking of this term. I just created this optimistic skepticism.
Yes,
Yeah, that's
definitely.
me. I'm
So you're like
optimistic.
you're optimistic about it, but you're also like wary of its potential consequences, which I think is I think it should just be
I think it's important
Yeah.
going into the future to be wary of all consequences, just so that you're not, just so that you're aware and not going into the future completely blind and not knowing what you're throwing yourself into.
Yeah, exactly. This is kind of evolving the conversation, but we have talked about sustainability before. And this goes back to a quote that we had mentioned in our sustainability biomimicry podcast, but like sustainable tech is the future because it has to be, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So what ideas do you guys have in incorporating sustainability into our transportation?
It's so tough. I think like this is actually this is predominantly government centric, in the sense where really we have to just phase out cars that burn oil, with like soon, because we have to, right?
Yeah.
Sustainable cars are the future because they have to be,
Right.
Yeah.
I think also one of the things that I was just thinking of is not only like phasing out other things through legislation, but also incentivizing people to use different technologies.
Yeah.
The way, like, one of the examples that I can immediately think of, I don't know about other states, but I know that at least in like Texas, there's a thing as like a carpooling lane, because they want
Yeah.
less people to use more cars, because it's more efficient, better for the environment if a lot of people get in a single car. And what do they get in return? They get a faster, quote unquote, lane where they can get, places faster.
Right.
So maybe having a dedicated, like, actually there are EV like lanes as well in some states.
Yeah.
So maybe having a dedicated either self-driving or fully electric lanes, having more of them over time, incentivizing people not only to use it but to get places faster. Also, like tax deductions on maybe if you buy a new electric car, having tax deductions on that, making it easier for you as a person to have that technology available to you, so that not only are you technically quote unquote safer if it has like a self-driving feature that is good, but also that doesn't use fossil fuels as much as like other vehicles would. I think that's also like a pretty good way of incentivizing people to get these new technologies to phase out the old ones.
Yeah, I like that idea. Like just like the more you incentivize people, right, the more likely they are to adopt these technologies. I think it's a really interesting idea. I think also, speaking of like the rocket transportation, like the Hyperloop, I think those are kind of incentives in themselves in a way, because you're getting places so much faster. And if that's what you're looking for, like very quick transportation, it encourages you to use those technologies. Um, so I guess that would like encourage you to go on like a Hyperloop versus like, which presumably will be like sustainable and like super quick and like public transportation versus being in like a one person car or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think just the idea of incentivizing people to use sustainable public transportation. I think one really good example is like New York,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
I used to live. They have like hydrogen powered, like public transport, like buses and stuff. And I think that is really where we need to be at, like using hydrogen power, solar power, those kind of renewable energies. I think it just we have to, right? Like there's no other option. Um, and to kind of wrap up the conversation, I think this is like the ultimate goal, right? Is not just extremely fast transportation, but instantaneous transportation.
Yes.
So this could be a whole topic in itself. But teleportation,
Right.
what do you guys think?
That ties back to our quantum computing.
It
where
does, yes.
with quantum computing, we sort of the quantum computer essentially allowed us to theorize teleportation as being entirely possible without going too deep into the science. Basically, it's theoretically possible to teleport matter from point A to point B in space. So I think it's possible. Whether we want to do it with people is an entirely different story. I'm thinking that people are too valuable of cargo to try and teleport, but I think as far as things go,
Oh, it's a
right?
good point.
Like I
Yeah.
think as far as objects go, it's something that is really an exciting prospect, and I think that it'll allow us to transport things very quickly across the world, but even across the universe. It can allow us to explore the universe and travel to different parts of the universe via a probe, right? So, and then the probe can come back with pictures, right, which can then give us all kinds of wonderful, juicy information about things outside of the explorable universe.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I think also teletransportation. That whole idea is also really great for getting things that need to get places. Like we could essentially, quote unquote, if it was energy efficient enough, we could solve the food crisis that happens in a lot of places. Because you know how we say, right? We have a lot of
Yeah.
a lot of wasted food, and the only problem with delivering it is literally logistics because we can't get it there in time. By the time it gets there, it's not good anymore. But if we were able to, like, in a second, split of a second, transport it where it needs to, like materials to, like, after a hurricane happens or something, get the proper equipment that they need to be able to build themselves back up. Things like that, or even convenience things. Like, what if you were moving to like a whole other country and you just needed all your like baggage and luggage to get there? Because as we know now, sometimes things can get lost in transport, and that's like super inconvenient if you have clothes or all your things that you need to essentially survive in your new place. So I think on the convenience side, plus on the we need to help people out side, this could be like a super revolutionary technology.
I think just this whole conversation has got me thinking about the fact that as transportation technology increases in its complexity and its capability, it will make it'll make the value of property sort of level out, right?
Oh yeah.
Think about it, because suddenly, no matter where you live, you'll always be able to get somewhere else in under an hour.
You're right.
So there will be no reason as to why certain land is more valuable than other pieces of land. Just this whole conversation has got me thinking about that, because once we make transportation to any part of the world extremely easy, why live close to somewhere if you can get to halfway across the world in a matter of moments?
You're right.
You could live in Japan 1 week, live in Germany 1 week, live in Brazil 1 week, right? Like,
right. Or like
kind
you
of-
could go, I think like it'd be more like you could go have breakfast in France,
yeah,
lunch in Japan,
exactly.
dinner in Australia, right? Like,
It kind of just opens like a whole new era of just, I don't know, like
you're not
travel.
bound by your location.
Exactly. Yeah. That's, my mind is blown right now. I didn't even think of that.
Would be
I was just
daily
thinking-
nomads.
Right, yeah.
Oh my god. That's so cool though. But just like cargo, I didn't even think of the cargo side of it, like transporting that. I was just thinking of the people, getting people places,
Right.
but the idea of like distribution, like getting things to people in need,
Well, that's
that
the
is
thing.
really
That's the
valuable.
thing. Like, I can't remember who said it, but essentially they said that somebody said that they judged a city based on its public transportation, because the effectiveness of public transportation sort of tells you how much a city would care about, say, equity, right? Because if there's a readily available public transportation that is reliable, people won't necessarily have to have cars in order to get jobs, right? Things like that. Like, so to sort of apply this concept to that's already applicable in a city to the entire world, it can theoretically make resources totally available to every part of the world.
yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's really interesting to think about, and I think that transportation technology improving is going to be a total game changer for society.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, it can help create a more equitable world. So, yeah, that's a really cool idea to end on. I hope all of our listeners enjoyed. Think about what kind of sustainable, futuristic transportation technologies you would want to see in the future. But I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you, Max.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll see you on the next one. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.